Welcome. God, this is a wonderful crowd for a beautiful day. It's wonderful to have you all here. I am delighted to celebrate the women of Williams on the 40th anniversary of the first fully coeducational class. So that's the first class to have entered as freshmen. And on this occasion, we're celebrating not only the diverse paths and accomplishments of these women, but also the ways in which women have changed Williams. We do that today at this forum, and we're doing this in a story in the upcoming issue of the Williams magazine, which is going to feature one of today's speakers, Cheryl Robertson Joyner. So you can look forward to that in your mailboxes. To try to imagine for a second Williams College without women. It's impossible to do that. I certainly cannot do that. But it wasn't so long ago that the very idea of a co-ed Williams seemed impossible. And that was well before we, by the way, won all those Directors' Cups. So we keep winning the Directors' Cup. If you're paying close attention, you realize we're winning the Directors' Cup because it's the women's teams that are winning all those championships, including this year women's tennis and Williams golf. Let's give it up for women's tennis and Williams golf. And the crew team, women's crew team, brought it home for us this year. Going to give it up for crew, too. All right. And so to a large extent, this was a long story coming. The college paved the way for coeducation more than a half century ago under the leadership of President Jack Sawyer, when fraternities were eliminated and the college took responsibility for the housing and the feeding of students. And then we began to accept a handful of transfer and exchange students, and eventually in 1971, we enrolled our first female freshmen. Today, our student body is half female. We're not yet having to practice affirmative action for men. We can still find men qualified to come to Williams. I'm happy to tell you that. And our 40 years of alumni have had a profoundly positive influence on Williams and on the wider world. It's especially fitting that our commencement speaker last weekend was Ursula Burns, the first female African-American CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And by the way, she was awesome. So if you want to go to the tape and see her speak, I really recommend it. I'm also pleased to note that as of the 1st of July, women will hold a majority of positions in the college's senior administrative team. And I realize I'm currently standing in the way of this, but I expect that before too long, Williams is going to see a woman president as well. Yeah. Just don't be in such a hurry. Now, we still do have a lot of work, and very important work to do, to make Williams fully inclusive and supportive of women, to attract more women faculty and students to fields where they've long been underrepresented in particular. But in acknowledging the work that is still to be done, we also can celebrate how far we've come and show our gratitude to those whose work and example make possible today's Williams. And that's what we're going to do today. It's what this event is about, and I'm honored to be here to welcome you and to present today's panelists. Now, you all went to Williams, so you're good readers, and by now, while I've been talking, you've read the amazing biographies of these four women, so I'm not going to then use up even more time to repeat those biographies here, but I do want to say a word about each of our panelists. First, Kathy Bogan, the class of 1975. Kathy has over 30 years' experience in publication of all sorts, from book design to running the presentation department at a major metropolitan daily. After the Rocky Mountain News closed its doors, Kathy applied for a job from a cryptic job posting. Design editor needed in foreign country. Apply here. Well, sure, who wouldn't apply for that? This resulted in her moving to East Africa to work in the thriving daily print news business. And when the class president for 75 was asked for someone with the most unusual story to tell, Kathy was the first person that she thought of. And she didn't just do that. Kathy spent a couple of years teaching mountaineering, caving, and doing desert travel. Cheryl Joyner, class of 1985. Sheryl graduated high school and came to Williams 2 years younger than her peers. She was a prodigy from the beginning. She tells a story about how she stalked Arthur Levitt during one of the trustee meetings while he was a trustee and she was a student. She waited around outside the president's office, and when he came out, she asked him cold if he would hire her as an intern at the stock market. If you're any students in this room, please don't do that. However, it worked for Sheryl. He offered her an internship on the spot and took her under his wing that summer. Sheryl has a custom-made purple couch that was given to her by Prince. That is the single coolest thing about any person at this reunion, all 2,000 of you this weekend. That is the single coolest thing. I think really we all ought to have purple couches when she moved back to the East Coast. So Sheryl spent many years on the road managing artist tours as the VP of live management and is the keeper of many music industry secrets, and after drinks tonight, she will be spilling them all in the class of '85 tent. Norma Lopez, class of 1995. When we asked the various women from the class of 1995 who were involved in the hunger strike for Latino studies to speak as a group, they opted to have Norma speak on their behalf instead. Norma came to Williams from a high school in Chicago that was 95% Latino. And that culture shock, that moment, that transition really shaped her entire career. And she works now and wants to ensure that students are prepared to thrive in schools like Williams. And now she claims, and this is a claim again you're gonna have to test after the panel, she claims that her children, Avi and Carolina, already know the words to the mountains. Which would actually be better than most of you in this room, as far as I could tell, from all the mountains singing and people peeking at the lyrics that I've been observing. Finally, last but far from least, Andrea Park, class of 2010. So Andrea, when she was here at the college, worked on the record, and she had the opportunity to interview Katie Couric. And clearly that kicked off a career in global journalism. How could it not? Beijing, CNN, Piers Morgan show, that must have started with that experience. She plays the violin and the piano and enjoys cooking in her spare time. One of her goals is to be an on-air television reporter and has a long career ahead of her, Andrea. So now I'm going to turn it over to the four of you to tell us what you're here to tell us.
I did a lot of caving in my 20s. And I mean the crawling around in a cave kind of caving, not the giving up kind of caving. Part of caving was surveying, creating maps of caves so you could see where one chamber and passage connected with another and where there might be a new entrance. Or looking for places where you would find virgin passage. Virgin passage is a place in a cave where no humans have gone before. Underground, traces of people who have gone before you are pretty easy to recognize because there's no weather in a dry cave, so nothing gets washed away. Footprints remain, dust remains. I discovered a virgin passage once. I had noticed a small hole under a rock, squeezed my head into it, and dropped down onto the floor below. The room where I landed was round, like the inside of a yurt. The walls were red, studded with white gypsum crystals. In the middle of the floor was the skeleton of a bat. There was no sound other than my own breathing. I had crossed a threshold and emerged in a place where no one had ever been before. It wasn't on a map. Yeah, baby. To be part of the class of 1975 was kind of an accident of birth. We just happened to have been born in 1953 or so, had good SAT scores, good grades, maybe we played a sport or an instrument or done some volunteer work or something. And we had a certain spirit of adventure. There weren't a lot of women around to guide the way. We were mostly on our own. I had 3 women professors 2 of them in my senior year. Some of us had none. Our commencement speaker was Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan had a lot of firsts. She was the first African American elected to the Texas State Senate since Reconstruction, and the first Southern Black woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, among other things. And she was Time Magazine's Man of the Year for 1975. But let me clarify. She and 11 other women were Time Magazine's Man of the Year. The Man of the Year for 1975 was the American woman. Okay, count them down. Susan Brown Miller, Kathleen Byerly, Allison Cheek, Jill Conway, Betty Ford, Ella Grasso, Carla Hills, Barbara Jordan, Billie Jean King, Carol Sutton, Susie Sharp, Addie Wyatt. How many did you get? Some? I got 4. Okay, their firsts included being the first woman to publicly celebrate the Eucharist in the Episcopal Church, the first woman to be elected governor of a U.S. state without following her husband to office, the first woman to serve as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the first female managing editor of a major U.S. daily newspaper, and so on. You get the idea. In declaring 1975 the year of the American woman, Time said, "Enough U.S. women have so deliberately taken possession of their lives that the event is spiritually equivalent to the discovery of a new continent." Then they went on to say that the truly exceptional development was the change in the status of the everyday, usually anonymous woman who had moved into the mainstream of jobs, ideas, and policy making. We are they, the exceptional and everyday woman, exploring the new continent. And we still are. There was no map. I've liked that mostly. When there is not a road, then you don't have to take it. We've gotten to invent our routes and to make our own maps. There were a few do not enter signs, but these days, those warnings are fewer, at least in this part of the world. I started my career as a teacher, then a mountaineering teacher, then a graphic designer, and an artist, and a journalist, and a manager, and an editor, and a teacher again. The position I held for the longest was 14 years at the Rocky Mountain News in Denver. I was there during the Columbine shootings, the fall of Baghdad, the Oklahoma City bombing trials, 9/11, and Barack Obama's nomination at the Democratic National Convention in Denver. A few weeks after the Obama inauguration, the Rockies' corporate parent closed it down. They laid off the entire newsroom, about 250 of us. In 2009, not a good year to lose your job, especially if you're in your 50s. Especially if you have 2 kids in college, one of them at Williams. That was definitely not on my map. So I did a bit of teaching, some freelance design work, some web editing, so forth. About 10 months and 100 job applications later, I ran across an ad on one of the job boards that I was scouring. I had a little spoiler here. Design editor needed in foreign country. That was it. No country, no details. I applied. In August of 2010, my husband Dan and I arrived in Nairobi, Kenya, where I worked for the next 3 years as the design editor for Nation Media Group. We were there for the vote on the new Constitution, for the indictments from the International Criminal Court over the 2008 post-election violence, for the 2012 election, where two of the indicted, Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, were eventually chosen as president and deputy president. Women's roles in Kenya tend to be viewed much more traditionally than they are here in the US, which means pressure to leave decisions and actions to the men. But the roles are changing. The Kenyans are venturing onto the new continent of possibilities for women that Time magazine mentioned 40 years ago, but it's slow. Even more so than here, not everyone thinks it's a good idea. So they don't want it on the map. So there were some challenges in working there. Questioning authority was done with extreme caution. But, you know, over the past 40 years, I've learned how to navigate those do not enter signs. There was an enormously talented designer in the business department there named Genevieve. And there was a guy who had been running their department, or who had been running their team. So I moved him to a different department so he could expand his portfolio, and that put Jen in charge. Her editor was not pleased, but he went with it grudgingly. Before I left Kenya, Jen thanked me for having been there, for giving her a chance, and for being an example that a woman could lead and the world would not implode. I had helped her find a route on her map. I'm not sure where my own map will lead next, but I hope it stays on that new continent Time mentioned 40 years ago. And to all of my classmates, I salute you and your journeys. There you go.
Okay. Thank you, President Falk, for that warm introduction. It seems like you have a couch on the way. And it was a pleasure meeting with you in New York City. I am just so happy to be back at my beloved Williams College with my family and loved ones after all these years. And most honored to have been chosen by the Alumni Office to represent the alumnae of my decade, the 80s. Oh yeah, where are my 80s people at? Okay, there you go, give me somebody, all right. I would especially like to thank Janine Hetherington and Sharifa Wright in the Alumni Office for their extraordinary, and I mean extraordinary, outreach efforts on my behalf. They had to find me. Although my talk will speak to my perspective as a woman of Williams here during the 80s, I'm hopeful that you will find timeless and relatable themes that will speak to your experience here in the Purple Valley as well. With that, let's get started. During the early 80s, the college had a program to attract academically successful minority candidates, and I received a lovely invitation to tour the campus for a weekend. The college sent a bus to pick us up at Port Authority bus terminal in New York City and transport us to a wondrous new land in the Berkshires we would come to know as the Purple Valley. I thought Williams was the most beautiful place I had ever seen and the perfect place to study. It immediately became my first choice, and I was beyond thrilled when I got accepted. I arrived on campus at the age of 16, shortly after my epic Sweet 16 birthday party my mom and dad threw for me in New Jersey. I had a single dorm room at the top of Morgan Hall with a view of Spring Street that, as a curious bonus, came with a huge built-in alarm clock because my bed was positioned right next to the clock tower at LaSalle Gym. Let's just say I was never late for class. In the early 80s, even though Williams was fully co-ed, the atmosphere still felt extremely male-dominated. It seemed like the frat houses had just closed and tried to rejigger themselves to fit women. Despite coeducation, the college still had not yet shaken its all-male roots. Entering Williams College at such an early age from an inner-city high school in New Jersey, competing with students from elite boarding schools, and with about an incoming class of about 10 people who looked like me was quite an adjustment, to say the least, even though I was a straight-A student who had skipped grades prior to arriving on campus. So many of my peers on campus were a bit older than me, which made it challenging at times to find common ground. I knew I had to stretch and expand myself beyond my years in order to succeed. I felt like a fish out of water that landed in the Purple Valley. While I absolutely love the physical environment of Williams, it took me a while to adjust to student life. Due to the rigors of the heavy coursework, I was singularly focused on succeeding academically. One of the first things I learned here in Biology 101 was that either an organism adapts to its new environment or dies. At that moment, Williams instantly became less pastoral and more like an extended episode of Survivor. Armed with my new survive or die mantra, I sought out mentors to help me adjust to life on campus and found them in 5 people who I lovingly call my Eve tribe. David Bowen, class of '83, Keith Hops, class of '83, my Aunt Rita Pete, my Uncle Wallace Pete, and English professor Ilona Bell. Oh my God, I have not seen her in 30 years and she's sitting right here. Yes. Please, thank you. Bowen and Hops were leaders in the Black Student Union and were like my big brothers on campus who showed me how to navigate the rough roads in the Purple Valley. My Aunt Rita and Uncle Wallace Pete lived an hour away in Albany and were a crucial part of my local family support system during my time here in the Purple Valley. They both were high-ranking New York State government officials who would come pick me up for the weekend anytime I wanted to take a break from campus and was in need of family time and a great home-cooked meal. My Aunt Rita, who passed away shortly after I graduated from Williams, was the epitome of strength, grace, elegance, and style. She used to bring me to her office and was the first person to teach me how to conduct myself in a professional manner, write corporate memos, and would take me to the mall to teach me how to dress appropriately for any occasion. I'm hoping I'm doing her proud today. She and my Uncle Wallace had a very loving home, which was a welcome retreat during my college days. Her invaluable life lessons completely shaped how I conduct myself as a professional and in my personal life to this day. My Uncle Wallace Pete, who finally remarried a few weeks ago to my new beautiful Aunt Arvella, he's sitting right here. I brought everybody with me. Has been my rock my whole life. Nothing deterred him from coming to Williams whenever I asked, no matter how many feet of snow was on the mountain on the way to the Purple Valley. He was there for every Williams family day and made sure I kept pocket money so I could fully enjoy the Williams experience. Through his dedicated example, he really taught me the importance of putting family first, no matter the circumstance. I didn't fully understand it at the time, but his now ingrained key life lesson has crucially served me well in making decisions during certain career crossroads I faced, particularly as a senior executive woman, and during key life moments post-Williams. I would never be able to repay the debt I owe to my Uncle Wallace and Aunt Rita for being there for me fully during my crucial time of development. Professor Ilona Bell. I don't know if any of you have had her as an English professor here. You would have been very lucky if you did. And she's still here, which is wonderful. She was the singular influence who helped me develop an appreciation for the liberal arts educational process. She is a force of nature with a gentle style that taught me the importance of balancing educational rigor with taking the time to smell the fresh mountain air. She and her husband Bob would graciously invite students to their beautiful home to discuss great literary works. Their gardens look like a scene straight out of A Midsummer Night's Dream. To this day, she is one of the greatest spirits I have ever met. Oh, I'm so glad to be able to say this to her, right? Because she's here. All right. To this day, she's one, to this day, she's one of the greatest spirits I have ever met and instilled in me a lifelong love of the arts, literature, and writing. The lessons from Bowen, Hops, Aunt Rita, Uncle Wallace, and Professor Bell not only helped me make the transition to college life, but truly helped me prepare for life after Williams. They have my eternal gratitude for being my ETH tribe. As many of my fellow alumni in this room know all too well, going to class into the main dining hall of Baxter at the time to eat and retrieve your mail during winter is very much like a hunting and gathering trek in the Arctic tundra. In Williams winter, which takes up most of the school year, unless you were big on skiing, you spent a lot of time trying to keep warm indoors. In winter, during my rare downtime while here in the 80s, I would watch MTV in the common room of my dorm, back when music videos were still a new medium. Watching videos of Prince, Madonna, and Bruce Springsteen helped me unwind from the rigors of the Williams course load. I loved the creativity of the channel. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen in programming on television. I found this new fledgling network keenly tuned into what I valued in culture at the time, namely music and style. By watching, I also strongly felt I was in a community of like-minded people who thought and lived way outside of the box. As a result, I knew instantly in my core that contributing to society within the creative community was something I was going to do. Watching MTV got me through the Williams Arctic chill and ultimately shaped my decision to pursue a career in the entertainment industry. And within a few years post-Williams, I was creating global marketing campaigns and producing concerts for those same artists and many more. I'm very happy to say that with the help of my ETH tribe, I finally secured my footing in the Purple Valley, and at the age of 19, during my final semester of my senior year here at the college in 1985, was accepted to Harvard Business School. After graduating from Harvard, we'll just fast forward through those years, I immediately began making my name for myself, developing and successfully executing global marketing strategy for musicians, represented by major labels including Warner Brothers Records, Sony, and Universal Music Group. Over the course of my 20-plus year career, I was widely credited for selling hundreds of millions of records by introducing new artists to the marketplace and revitalizing the careers of music legends, sometimes changing their names to a symbol, right? And just recently, I was most proud to have been presented with my second professional Grammy from the Recording Academy for my achievements in the music industry. Oh, yes, so there you go. I was working as Vice President of Marketing for Universal Music Group in 2000 when my daughter, Madison, was born. My priorities were immediately tested as a woman executive, and I had to make some very important life choices. Luckily, I had learned so much from my ETH tribe that the decisions once she arrived were relatively easy to make. My mom, Helen Murray, and my aunt, Geraldine Patterson, sitting right over here and over here, were my saving grace. My mom instilled in me a strong work ethic in my early childhood and worked hard to support our family. She was and still is a tough, brutally honest, and no-nonsense parent who fully expected me to head to college, excel academically, and to go on to have a successful career, never using race or gender as an excuse. My Aunt Geraldine, seen here photobombed with my friend Oprah, is a retired math teacher and to this day is my right hand, to say the least, and instilled in me the love of world travel at a very early age. I was so fortunate that my mother and Aunt Geraldine retired and stepped in to take care of my daughter during those times when I traveled the globe with artists for work, sometimes on the jet right next to me and staying in the hotel while I worked, so I would be able to see my daughter. It gave me a great peace of mind knowing she was in such loving care. They are my Uncle Wallace's sisters, and our very close-knit family structure has served my daughter and I extremely well. That's Madison today. She has films that have been shown in Tribeca Film Festival. That's her on the stage there. Because of the things I've learned from them and my Eve tribe, I've made very clear career choices, shifts, and sacrifices so that I would be there for Madison as a present parent. It can be a 24/7 work week, so I had to set my boundaries very early on. And after being her parent for nearly 15 years now, I am proud to say I'm raising the next woman of Williams. I eventually went on to serve as vice president of Alliances for Live Nation, producing extremely large-scale live concert events around the world and executing entertainment contracts for companies including American Express, Adidas, Geico, and Major League Baseball. A lot of the artists I worked with in the record labels, I also ended up producing a lot of their shows. This year, seeking even more control over my schedule, I became chairman of my own company, Para Music Group, which Para stands for producers, arrangers, and recording artists. And we source music from over 144 countries for use in film, television, and ad campaigns. Right now, I'm deeply immersed in a major project with a super producer called Timberland, who is the executive music producer for Fox's TV smash hit show Empire. Maybe some of you have heard of it. I've now worked with and have great relationships with every major recording artist and entertainment executive on the planet that I ever admired while I was a student here at Williams. And thank God for cold winters, because that might have turned out very differently. I'm also very proud to say that I've helped and mentored many people along the way. I think that careers in the entertainment industry are well suited for Williams grads because their well-rounded liberal arts education makes them uniquely prepared to think fast on their feet. In my business, no 2 days are the same, and you have to wear many hats in order to succeed. Overall, I have to say that being a woman of Williams during the 80s served me well, primarily because it was not particularly warm and welcoming to women during that time. It was a struggle to find my voice at the college. And overcoming that challenge was a gift that prepared me better than anything to face the daily real-world challenges as a senior executive woman in the male-dominated entertainment industry. In closing, I would like to thank the man who's been the wind beneath my wings of this woman of Williams for some time now, Mr. Sylvester Knox, Senior Vice President of Global Wealth Management for Merrill Lynch. He stands strong beside me as a loving companion and I guess a filmer today. And I deeply appreciate his unwavering support of our family. Well, I learned many invaluable things during my 4 years here at Williams, and I hope I wrote this right, Professor Bell, because my English professor is sitting right here, and it's a little extra pressure when she's right there. Okay. I wanted to share my top 3 lessons I learned here in the Purple Valley. Lesson number 3. Develop great hunting and gathering skills while here in the Arctic tundra. Comes in handy when things get heated in the boardroom. Lesson number 2. Associate yourself with a great tribe to support you, for they are crucial to your survival beyond the Purple Valley. Fellow EIFs, family, and a small core of friends have been a consistent and incredible support system along the way and have stood as shining beacons of light on my road less traveled to the top of the corporate ladder and back to the Purple Valley. And anytime I've called a Williams alum, they go bend over backwards to make sure that they're available to help, and I really appreciate that. And some of you in here I've called on as well. And finally, a liberal arts education teaches you to think fast on your feet. This will especially keep you safe from all the skunks you are sure to face in the real world. Thank you so much for this honor.
Okay, I'm not going to stand back here because who am I kidding? You won't be able to see me. And let me set the record straight. My 7-year-old daughter memorized the Purple Cow poem 2 years ago. So don't ask them to sing the mountains. They don't know the words. But even knowing that, you would think that my experience is very different than what I'm about to tell you. But I actually have a confession to make about my experience at Williams. I didn't love Williams when I first arrived. And I was pretty sure Williams didn't love me back. It was complicated. As a matter of fact, the first time I wrote this, I focused exclusively on those complications. I wrote this chronologically ordered story about my journey through Williams. And it made sense. I wrote about who I was before I went to college, and began with the large family I left behind. This is a recent picture of my first cousins, minus 2, on my mother's side. So there's a whole, maybe 50 or so other people. I was one of 5 siblings, and that brother who's harassing us in this picture, he was 2 when I left for college. Daughter to working-class Mexican immigrants. That baby is me, and that lovely lady holding me is my mama. My dad is next to her, and then other relatives. They were so proud when I went to college that they actually carried around with them a crumpled-up U.S. News and World Report. My sister, you see, she'd gone to Princeton, so if they wore Princeton gear, everyone congratulated my parents profusely on their accomplishments. So they wanted to prove Williams was just as impressive when they got that usual question, right? What's Williams? So they'd pull out the little piece of paper. In that first draft, I moved on to the challenges of being here. How people ate pizza and I ate tacos and tamales. I'd never even had pizza before I got here, and my husband still thinks that that's unbelievable. How I didn't know how to hold a conversation in one single language, and sometimes faced confused suitemates who'd say I was slipping in and out of Spanish, mid-conversation. How I was asked by an entry mate why, after spending so many hours at the library, I was still up all night studying, and how that person couldn't understand that it was because the day I'd spent at the library was for my work-study job. How I had to part ways with friends who couldn't stay, but as sad as I was for them, I was preoccupied with the thought that I'd be packing those bags next. How after spending the first day of a hunger strike in Baxter, I decided to sleep in my friend's suite, because honestly, I was petrified. When the lights were off and it had been quiet for a few minutes, I whispered into the darkness, not expecting a response, "Linda, what if we don't eat tomorrow?" Words did indeed fail us. And after a pause, we got weepy with laughter and didn't know if we were crying from laughing so hard or laughing because we were crying. We thought we could bring change to Williams that would provide all of us with much needed support, but I'm not sure we understood what we were getting into. So that's Linda, second from the left, and this is her graduation right after the hunger strike. When I was done with this draft, I read and reread the words that no longer felt true. I was talking about someone I knew well, but was not me, and hadn't been for a long time. You see, I live a picturesque life. I live the life my parents wanted for me. In a suburb that growing up, I knew by name only and associated with privilege. In reality, now that I live there, I know all it is a well-educated community with excellent schools where children, my children, can safely walk to school every day and get a great education. Those college experiences, however, were instrumental in shaping the me who stands before you. But I am not that Norma. That Norma felt isolated at Williams and became an accidental activist. And by the end of her senior year, found her voice and a way to talk about Williams that was true, yet grateful. That Norma wondered why she would stay in Williamstown another 3 years. To take a job in the admissions office. But A, she needed a job. A fact her parents reminded her of daily. And B, thought it couldn't hurt to stay, maybe learn to embrace rather than just tolerate her alma mater. I know I sound schizophrenic saying this out loud, but that's how I felt back then. I felt segmented, like I was juggling different identities. I fully recognize that college is a time for growth and change for everyone, but when you add social mobility to that equation, you're looking at an extreme transformation. Bear with me as I read a brief poem I read my sophomore year from a Chicana literature anthology. It is called So Not to Be Modeled by Berenice Zamora. You insult me when you say I'm schizophrenic. My divisions are infinite. Reading this poem was the beginning of feeling that I had these segmented identities. I was a different person with different people and in different situations. Actually, I think it began before reading this poem, and it probably began the spring of my first year when calling home, my best friend pointed out that I sounded white. I began to be very self-conscious after that, and about how I presented myself. I didn't want to be seen as less academic by my Williams friends, and certainly not less Mexican to my friends back home. I know, you could easily call this code switching, but to a young, naive 18-year-old, it was just plain confusing. I had to figure out who I was. I had to figure out that I was just one person who was evolving. That's what Williams was for me, transformative. That class I took sophomore year was called U.S. Women of Color and Culture with Gladys Jimenez Munoz. She was the Bolin Fellow that year, which, by the way, is a great program. That class made a huge impact on me. She was one of the first professors I'd heard talk about privilege and gender and color, not just race, in ways that both made sense, but also challenged so many things I had perceived as true. And one of the first things she pointed out to us was our participation in a structure of privilege as Williams students and later as alums. I had never thought of myself as anything other than the child of working class immigrants. And now I was forging a new identity that would change the trajectory of my life and frankly that of my family's. But it was one that felt foreign and I couldn't fully grasp. Working in the admissions office turned out to be an unexpectedly reflective time for me. Here I was, fresh out of college, and this very tumultuous experience, surrounded by piles of applications and on a strict reading timeline. But I was spending a lot of time wondering if I was helping students or if I was setting them up to fail at worst or feeling lost and fragmented at best. These questions eventually led me to the dean's office and in the long run became a critical part of my career. to help students access a private selective college education, but also to feel successful there. It also led to making peace with my college experience. This is my first official reunion, so I wasn't sure about that last part until a few years ago when I got the call from the Alumni Executive Committee. And as an alum, I had volunteered some time for the admissions office and even donated to the alumni fund. But that was because my friends worked in the admissions office, so they called and asked for help. And my friends called and asked for money, so that was easy. So when they called and asked if I would serve on the Alumni Executive Committee, I thought, I don't have friends there. And that's too much rah-rah Williams, and that's not me. I really thought those people have a different relationship with Williams. They must really love it. That experience forced me to further reflect on all that I had because of Williams. And I knew I too loved Williams. And it loved me back. So I rah-rahed it up with the best of them. And I found some new friends, which was the best part, as well as gaining a new perspective on the college. I even brought my kids back for my husband's reunion officially because I met that guy here. So even that happened because of Williams. The most gratifying aspect of this new relationship, however, was coming back for the Latino Studies 10th anniversary celebration last May. It was incredibly rewarding to hear from the Latino Studies concentrators and know we helped shape that environment. The faculty and courses, the Davis Center staff, the dean's office all provided much needed support to current students, and I was happy for them. But I wondered how my own experience would be different if that Williams was my experience. Not that it's perfect, but the changes were satisfying to see. The other really satisfying part was that a large part of it was held in Griffin Room 3, a room used to begin the conversations that would eventually end the hunger strike. It was the last memorable moment we'd spent in that room together. And it was an emotional meeting where that same friend I cried with made an impassioned speech that moved most of us to tears, both from its intensity and from her palpable weakness. 21 years later, we were celebrating 10 years of a program we sometimes doubted would become a reality. This time, there was only laughter. Honestly, I wouldn't change a thing about who I am and how I got here. The Williams I knew was the place that birthed my career aspirations and the place where my family was figuratively born. It is a place that itself has undergone change and growth because of its students. In retrospect, it's what I've loved most about the college. Not the 4 years I spent here, though in many ways they were wonderful, even through all the turmoil. No, it has unquestionably been standing on the sideline, watching Williams go through its own evolution. Observing as a student, an administrator, and an alum, the college react to the needs of its students, and sometimes do it effortlessly, and sometimes, like any imperfect being, struggle through it. As I look ahead in my life, both professionally and personally, I know I will continue to change and grow, and I will feel whole doing it. I know that Williams will grow and change also, but more significantly, it will continue to transform the lives of its students. Thank you.
Hi. This is me on August 1st, 2014. I was a bridesmaid at my close friend Monica's wedding in Sonoma. This is me on August 3rd, 2014, just 36 hours later. I woke up in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and tubes shoved into my throat and nose. My mom ran over and asked me if I remembered the accident. I shook my head no. I remembered walking down the aisle in my gray bridesmaid's dress. I remembered giving a speech about how my friend always thought she could do better except when it came to her husband. I remembered going out the night after with the wedding party and slurping down scorpion bowls at a tiki bar. Finally, I remembered laughing and holding up a glass of champagne at the newlyweds' apartment. After that, I had nothing. My mom explained that I had been involved in a hit-and-run accident after a drunk driver rear-ended my cab. She said that he had fled the scene, but his license plate fell off and police caught him soon after the crash. The force of the impact threw me forward and I hit my head against the armrest in front, which caused internal bleeding in my brain. I had something called a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. I was rushed to the hospital for emergency brain surgery. On the Glasgow Coma scale of brain injuries, where 3, the lowest score, means deep coma or brain death, and 15 means fully awake, doctors wrote that I was a 4. The surgeon warned my mom I might die in the operating room, but luckily I was wheeled out alive, even though I was in a coma. When I fully awoke a day later, I couldn't speak because of my breathing tube, but my mom gave me a pen and paper, and the first thing I scrawled was, "Is this for real or is this a nightmare?" I still couldn't believe it when my mom said it was real. I spent the next few days wondering if I'd ever be able to walk or talk again as I lay in bed. In my memory, these days meld together into a single hazy stretch of time I spent just blinking and looking at the walls of my hospital room. My quality of life improved when I was finally able to speak, but all I could feel and talk about was my pain. I said to my mom, "I know you don't want to hear this, but I've lost the will to live. I just want to die." I never thought I was the kind of person who could say something like that. But I had also never experienced this level of pain and despondency. I had pounding headaches and tubes everywhere. My head was completely shaved. I felt very sorry for myself. I had physically survived my accident, but I didn't know if I could bear this misfortune mentally and emotionally. But pretty quickly, I remembered that this wasn't the first time I had faced circumstances that seemed insurmountable. After leaving the nest, Williams is where I learned how to navigate unfamiliar situations and solve problems on my own. Williams is where I experienced the second most physically challenging experience of my life. Freshman year, I prayed to God and said, "I know I don't do this as often as I should, but I have a favor to ask you. Will you please break my leg and carry me out of this forest?" I was on Wolf. It sounds like a joke, but I didn't know I was capable of carrying a 40-pound backpack up and down 12 miles of steep trails until I did it, before classes even started. I knew if I could do that once, then I could get there again. The accident wiped my slate clean, and I had to start from scratch. For the second time in my life, I had to learn how to walk, talk, and feed myself. But this time I had some wisdom and confidence that I had built over my adult years, starting with college. Williams taught me that you're only bound by your own imagination. My freshman year, I enrolled in Chinese 101 on a lark. Learning Mandarin seemed impossible at times, and I cried often out of frustration. But I was too stubborn to quit. I ended up majoring in Chinese, and 2 years after graduation, I moved to China. It was an experience that connected me with fascinating people, taught me to be a better writer, and opened my eyes to a world outside the West. Before Williams, I never imagined that I would one day live in Beijing, but one class freshman year changed the course of my life. Entropy reigns supreme in life, but that's not a bad thing because we get to decide how we cope. I never thought I would be in a car accident and injure my brain. Things like that don't happen to people like you and me. We catch up with friends over coffee. We go for walks with our dogs. We eat dinner on the deck with our families. We don't get into car accidents that are near fatal. Except I did. And once it happened, I had to accept it and move on and rebuild my life the best I could. The day after I told my mom I wanted to die, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I started physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. I learned how to stand again. I regained enough strength to open soft drink bottles. I trained my fingers to type again, and I started sending short emails from my hospital bed. Just 5 days after the accident, I took my first steps for the second time in my life. It's amazing to feel that kind of progress in days. And every day after, I felt myself getting stronger and more capable. I wish I could tell you that I read great Russian novels or learned how to code in my hospital bed, but the reality isn't so grand. I watched a lot of Netflix, and I promise you it was all for the sake of self-preservation. The truth is, nothing made me appreciate life more than conquering the mundane. Every small milestone brought me joy, like bathing myself, walking down the hospital hallway to see the Bay Bridge from the window, eating pepperoni pizza again for the first time. And if you think it makes you happy to eat pizza at 2 in the morning on a Saturday night, try eating it after a week of applesauce. These were the moments that made me feel the most grateful to be alive, and I'm prouder of those accomplishments than any line I can write on my resume. Those few weeks in the hospital were undoubtedly the hardest in my life. But after the first few days, when I decided to change my attitude and not just survive, but survive well, I was pretty happy. I have very fond memories of being in that hospital. And that's in no small part thanks to the Williams community. Steph Kim and Cindy Hum contacted my friends to let them know what happened. Jess Mahoney, Anik Benavides, and Kristen Layden flew into San Francisco just to see me at the hospital. Meredith Craven would visit me every few days in the hospital, even just to sit next to my bed while I was asleep. Lots of you sent me flowers and books and letters and came to visit me at my parents' house in New Jersey after I flew home. I often think of my survival in very self-centered terms. I worked hard for this. I pushed myself in therapy. I was resilient. But I had tremendous support from my friends and family. Of course, I had my speed bumps. I remember when Jess, who's here right now, visited me, and I said to her, "This is really bad, isn't it? This is the kind of thing our classmates are talking about, right?" And they say, "Did you hear what happened to Andrea Park?" And she said, "Yes." And I just thought, why is this happening to me? How did my life get here? Why is it that people asked about my other classmates? Did you hear that she received a prestigious fellowship? Or did you hear that she got engaged? And for me, people asked, did you hear that she's in the hospital? I cried. I felt that out of my class, I was doing the worst by a long stretch. Around that time, Professor Sam Crane sent me a great line from the Analects by Confucius. The master said, "Only after the seasons turn cold can we truly know the resolve of pine and cypress." I didn't fully appreciate that quote at the time because I didn't have high hopes for myself. Back then, in August, I could never have guessed that within 6 months, I would go on an amazing journey through India and then return to my city life and work and write and play. I told my mom once that I was going to lose my 26th year of life to this accident. My birthday was 2 weeks before the crash. But my power to self-heal was so much greater than anyone had predicted. I'm still 26, and my yoga practice is better than it ever was. I wrote an ebook, I'm cooking, I'm taking improv classes, I'm having the time of my life. On August 3rd, 2014, I was in critical condition, and doctors said I might die. Today, I get to share the stage with 3 amazing women, that guy, and deliver a speech in front of the smartest people I know. Thank you.